The Trixster here, how do? Batsley, what do we have for today?
A real case of the shallow end of the pool. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is going to teach us about economics.
What?
But then the pragmatic side of it comes in, as you said. Mm-hmm. How do you pay for these? You know, you always see people coming in with economic arguments.
Mm-hmm. Yes, those pesky people with their economic arguments and their pragmatism. How ridiculous. Why bring that into her fantasies about how to pay for everything? How dare you, Trevor Noah?
And they say, look, these numbers don't really add up. You know, in order to get health care for everybody, this is what it would cost. Mm-hmm. That's going to be troubling. Even if you reverse the Republican tax deal, that's only going to make up 5% of what we need to pay for Medicare for all. Mm-hmm. You know, how do you pay for education for all? How do you pay for all of these ideas?
This is a very appropriate question. We can't even pay for the health care programs we currently have. You may notice the country's over $20 trillion in debt. You may also notice we have $120 trillion in unfunded liabilities. Where are these coming from? From all the health care and all the Social Security and all the promises we promised everybody that's currently alive today, veterans benefits, etc. So the idea that we can add on any more programs, no matter what daydream tax and scheme she comes up with, is ridiculous. But let's hear her out.
So this is an excellent question.
And I can promise you, she doesn't have an excellent answer.
And in fact, there's a lot of back of the envelope stuff based on our values. So for example, I sat down with a Nobel Prize economist last week. I can't believe I can say that. It's really weird, but
I honestly can't believe she won. I can tell you, the man she beat, I forget his name now, oh my God, he has got to be just livid that somebody with so little gravitas and presence, and quite frankly, exhibition of ability or lack thereof, defeated this guy in his election. But it's like I said in my first video on her. This was a purest example of identity politics victory. She's Hispanic, the district's 50% Hispanic, and she won. I mean, this person has no clue on policy or anything else. None, zero, zip, nada. She comes off like a high school freshman, really, with her, in fact, a high school freshman's more mature than her. It's crazy. This is the greatest gift ever given to the Republican Party, really, because you can just point at this. This is the future of the Democrat Party right here. And if you think that this is a good future, it's not. You should be scared as hell.
But one of the things that we saw is if people pay their fair share, if corporations and the ultra wealthy, for example, as Warren Buffett likes to say, if he paid as much as his secretary paid.
Yeah, this is what we incessantly hear from the left. If people just paid their fair share, if these corporations and wealthy people just paid their fair share, what is their fair share, Ocasio-Cortez? What would it be? I think really, if we really could get the truth out of you, the fair share would be whatever the hell you think it should be and can steal from them to pay for your liberal daydreams and fantasies, which is nonsense. Why don't we take a look at how much the wealthiest Americans pay? We're going to find out who pays their fair share, shall we? All right, so let's see who's not paying their fair share here, shall we? So it says here, rich people pay nearly 87% of all federal individual income tax in America. Wow. The richest 20% pay the 87%. Look at their average tax bill right there, okay? Second richest pay 12.9. There's their tax bill. Now you get down to middle income, they're only paying 4.2. And you say, wait a minute, these three numbers add up to more than 100. That's right, because the people really not paying their fair share are the lowest 40% here because they're putting no taxes in, but this negative here means they get an average back from the government of $643 and $621. Now, how is that even possible if you're not paying any taxes in? Well, it's possible Democrat politicians were fools. They are giving tax returns to people that pay no income tax. That's ridiculous. The people not paying their fair share are these people. And I, the trickster, would say they should be taxed. This lowest 20%, do they not benefit from the military? Do they not benefit from national parks? Do they not benefit from all the government programs and services? The answer is yes, and in fact, they benefit more because they're the ones using them. So why in the world are we giving them a tax break when they pay no taxes? These people should pay 1% of their income in taxes. I don't care if they make $10,000 a year, they're paying $100, okay? That's it. Second lowest should be paying 5% of their taxes, all right? If they are making $10,000 a year, they're going to pay $500. Well, they'll be making more. They're in the second lowest group, right? So whatever that would start, wherever it starts, they're going to pay 5% of their income. That's where you should be collecting your taxes. Not from the people that are already paying way more than their fair share.
15%, if you paid a 15% tax rate, if corporations paid, if we reversed the tax bill but raised our corporate tax rate to 28%, which is not even as high as it was before.
Right.
If we do those two things and also close some of those loopholes, that's $2 trillion right there. That's $2 trillion in 10 years.
This lady is such a neophyte. She doesn't know anything what she's talking about, nothing. Does she not realize that, it doesn't happen in a vacuum? All these predictions they make, we're going to get $2 trillion in 10 years. Who cares? You're $20 trillion in debt on what you already done. You've got $120 trillion unfunded liabilities. You're not talking about paying off debt with this $2 trillion. You're talking about more of your liberal dreams and fantasies and fantasy programs. The healthcare programs and the welfare programs and the Social Security programs that the Democrat Party has already put in place have us in this nearly totally bankrupt condition. But never mind that. Never mind that. Let's just discuss what she's saying. It's totally untrue because they make their predictions like nobody's going to react. When you raise their taxes, you think you're going to get the same amount of productivity? Absolutely not. These businesses are going to be less productive. They're going to do less. They don't want to pay these taxes. And she kind of gets in like an Obama, puts in regulations, of course, right? And that's what he did. That's why the Obama GDP was 1%. It was anemic. It was terrible. And the Trump GDP is excellent. It's up 4 or 5% and producing more revenues than ever. And you don't need to go any further than to look at our own recent history to understand that you get more revenues into the government with lower taxes. Here, let me demonstrate this. All right, here we have an article from the Heritage Foundation, The Historical Lessons of Lower Tax Rates, right? This is written in 2003, but it does not matter because all of these examples happened before then. So let's take a look at the tax cuts of the 1920s. Tax rates were slashed dramatically during the 1920s, dropping from over 70% to less than 25%. What happened? Personal income tax revenues increased substantially during the 1920s, despite the reduction in rates. Revenues rose from $719 million in 1921 to $1.164 billion in 1928, an increase of more than 61%. According to then Treasury Secretary Andrew Mellon, the history of taxation shows that taxes which are inherently excessive are not paid. The high rates inevitably put pressure upon the taxpayer to withdraw his capital from productive business and invest it in tax-exempt securities or to find other lawful methods of avoiding the realization of taxable income. The result is that the sources of taxation are drying up, wealth is failing to carry its share of the tax burden, and capital is being diverted into channels which yield neither revenue to the government nor profit to the people. Let's go to our next tax cut. Oh, the Kennedy tax cuts. A Democrat hero, okay? Kennedy was smart enough to cut taxes. President Hoover dramatically increased tax rates in the 1930s, and President Roosevelt compounded the damage by pushing marginal tax rates to more than 90%. Two wonderful Democrats. Recognizing the high tax rates were hindering the economy, President Kennedy proposed across-the-board tax rate reductions that reduced the top tax rate from more than 90% down to 70%. What happened? Tax revenues climbed from $94 billion in 61 to $153 billion in 68, an increase of 62%. According to President John F. Kennedy, our true choice is not between tax reduction on the one hand and the avoidance of large federal deficits on the other. It is increasingly clear that no matter what party is in power, so long as our national security needs to keep rising, an economy hampered by restrictive tax rates will never produce enough revenues to balance our budget, just as it will never produce enough jobs or enough profits. In short, it is a paradoxical truth that tax rates are too high today and tax revenues are too low, and the soundest way to raise the revenues in the long run is to cut the rates now. How about example number 3, the Reagan tax cuts? Thanks to bracket creep, the inflation in the 1970s pushed millions of taxpayers into higher tax brackets, even though their inflation-adjusted incomes were not rising. To help offset this tax increase and also improve incentives to work, save, and invest, President Reagan proposed sweeping tax rate reductions during the 1980s. What happened? Total tax revenues climbed by 99.4% during the 1980s, and the results are even more impressive when looking at what happened to personal income tax revenues. Once the economy received an unambiguous tax cut in January 1983, income tax revenues climbed dramatically, increasing by more than 54% by 1989, 28% after adjusting for inflation. According to then U.S. Representative Jack Kemp, one of the chief architects of the Reagan tax cut, at some point additional taxes so discourage the activity being taxed, such as working or investing, that they yield less revenue rather than more. There are, after all, two rates that yield the same amount of revenue: high tax rates on low production or low rates on high production. The rich pay more when incentives to hide income are reduced. There you have it. The three major tax cuts in the last 120 years produced more government revenues, the exact opposite strategy of what Miss Ocasio-Cortez is bloviating about. Thank you.
Now, if we implement a carbon tax on top of that, so that we can transition and financially incentivize people away from fossil fuels, if we implement a carbon tax, that's an additional amount of a large amount of revenue that we can have.
Ah, yes, another liberal idea, the old carbon tax. Well, here's an article from the Washington Times on why a carbon tax doesn't work, but I can summarize it pretty neatly. Basically, it's the same problem as we discussed before, right? You start taxing all of these industries. All industries, almost every industry uses energy. So you massively increase taxes on them through carbon taxes. What happens? Their products get more expensive. Less people buy them. The economy contracts, right? The economy contracts then, and you produce less revenues. Just as the same three examples I showed before. When you tax high amounts, it produces less revenue because industries contract, the economy implodes, people buy less, and you just have less economic activity, i.e. the Obama administration policies, right? Well, let's just take a look at what they're saying about his policy, shall we? Let's just take a quick look at one paragraph. Indeed, when Barack Obama was president, the Environmental Protection Agency created the model for the assessment of greenhouse gas-induced climate change. Magic, oh how clever. To assess the impact of the agency's Clean Power Plan regulations, which aim to limit greenhouse gas from power plants. Despite costing the economy as much as $39 billion annually, the CPP regulations would have averted only 0.019 degrees Celsius, 19 one-thousandths of a degree of potential future warming by 2100, according to Magic, an amount too low to be accurately measured with even the most sophisticated scientific equipment. And a state-based carbon tax would have even less impact on global temperature. Wow! So the real problem is China and India and these other countries that have no environmental restrictions in place, while the US and Europe are running the cleanest energy show in the world. So it's just another dumb liberal idea that's going to cause the economy to contract and they're going to get less revenues. But they don't care because they don't care about the revenues. They just want to stick it to rich people.
And then the last key, which is extremely, extremely important, is reprioritization. Just last year, we gave the military a $700 billion budget increase, which they didn't even ask for. They're like, we don't want another fighter jet. Like, they're like, don't give us another nuclear bomb. You know? They
Oh my God, really? Is that what they said? This lady is so infantile, it is unbelievable. She's going to be right up there with Mad Maxine for like, how are these people in Congress? It's just insane. So what are your plans to stop Chinese expansion in the South China Sea, basically well beyond their territorially recognized waters? What are your plans for Islamic terrorism and state-run regimes like Iran that invest in it? What are your plans to protect our allies and further try and stop Russia from advancing into the Ukraine and other local Eastern European countries? What are your ideas for all this? You don't think we need a military? I think we do need a military. In fact, that's enumerated in the Constitution that they provide for a military. It's not enumerated in the Constitution that whatever wacko, crazy left-wing programs you daydream about every day are to be provided.
And so a lot of what we need to do is reprioritize what we want to accomplish as a nation. And really what this is about is saying, Healthcare is important enough for us to put first.
Okay, if you look at the 2015 budget, which you can find on Google, and discretionary and non-discretionary pay, they spent about $1.1 trillion on healthcare, okay? The federal government did. That doesn't include Social Security. It is far, far greater if you include Social Security. On the military, they spent $586 billion. So health is already being prioritized over the military at a rate of at least 2 to 1.
Education is important enough for us to put first.
Now, if we look at education, what we quickly find out is that the United States invests more in education than almost every other industrialized country in the world. There are only 2 countries that invest more in education than the United States, Switzerland and Norway. However, the United States falls way down in the pack in educational outcomes. And this is the result of every study. So you can't just keep throwing money at this problem. There's a wider problem here. We have thrown as much money at it as we can. How much more would you like to throw at it? We're number 3 in the world, and we're in a huge country, and we're number 3 in the world in educational dollars spent per student, and yet our test scores are among the lowest in industrialized nations. That just shows you and disproves her theory that there hasn't been a focus of putting money behind this, but money is obviously not the answer.
And that is a decision that requires political and moral courage from both parts of the aisle.
Oh, what a great soundbite. That requires political and moral courage from both sides of the aisle. No, what requires political and moral courage from you and other far left-wing Democrats is to look at the facts and admit you're wrong. Trixster out. Batsley, keep the lights on.
You got it, Trixster. Hey, if you like what you're hearing, you want to hear more? Kick us a couple bucks on our Patreon site. The link's in the description below. Or you can buy some slick Trixster gear at the link in the description below. You can get a t-shirt or a sweet hoodie, or you can even take your morning cup of joe in one of our coffee mugs. Help us out and keep capitalism in America alive. Later.
And as always, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. Trixster out.